teaching children those things that they will remember at the moment that they need them without having to think about them. So it's about getting them to understand what it is to interact in a digital age.
If there are any early warning signs, it's our job to make sure that we're getting the right information in front of the right people as quickly as possible.
We can't miss that one thing that is actually true, can we? Because no matter what it is, safeguarding is paramount, isn't it? With the implementation of technology in the classroom, the risks and challenges of safeguarding has increased. Welcome to Empowered. I'm Ricky Brown, Apple Professional Learning Specialist at Sync. Today I'm joined by Antonia Noble, Barrister and Safeguarding Specialist at Safeguarding Fundamentals, and Shaun Philips, UK Account Director at Lightspeed Systems. Welcome Antonia, welcome Shaun. So, what I want to start today's episode off is asking you a very simple question. And that question is, what does protecting students in the digital age look like to you? And I'm going to ask you that first, Shaun.
I think first and foremost, protecting students in the digital age is extremely challenging. When you reflect back on what safeguarding used to look like, 5 to 10 years ago, it was probably more focused around the physical safety of students rather than the digital safety of students. When you look at the risks that are now involved with digital safeguarding in the shape of exposure to sexual harassment and cyberbullying, exposure to explicit content, things of that nature, the risks have just certainly increased far more than what they once were. Our job at Lightspeed is to really, take some of the pressure off of the shoulders of safeguarding leads and really make them aware of when there's areas of concerns that ultimately need their attention. So really our job is to make sure that they're fully aware of any early warning signs of things along the lines of self-harm, cyberbullying, school violence, explicit content. And our goal is to make sure that we get those notifications in front of the right people as quickly as possible. But to answer your question, I think it's an extremely challenging job right now. But like I say, our job is to try to make it just that bit more easier for safeguarding leads.
And I think one of the things you've said there is awareness, and raising the awareness that all of these things are out there. These are the things that are happening, and ensuring that safeguarding leads know that is a big move for again Lightspeed in itself. And I know we'll dig into that a little bit more. But first of all, I'd like to ask you the same question, Antonio.
I think Shaun's absolutely right. It's the reactive response is absolutely critical, and safeguarding leads knowing at the moment they need to know. So Lightspeed systems are really critical inside schools so that people who know and support can get there. I think there's a piece of work as well around sort of proactive safeguarding, so teaching children and young people how to behave online. What does that actually look like? What does that feel like? How can they keep themselves safe is the other side of it. So there's a proactive and the reactive stage, and they need to work together seamlessly, I think, for kids to be as safe as they can. But as Shaun says, it's a shapeshifter. It's moving every day, and where the threats are coming from, they're from all over the place. So we need to be moving as quickly as the dangers.
So let's dig into this a little bit more, and we'll go on to the technology side first, if that's okay. And we'll think about what are them things that we can do in schools now that will really help schools to be safer.
Yeah. From a Lightspeed perspective, and just generally, filtering is a fundamental requirement, and it's almost the first step to really kind of protecting students in education, and also allowing them to, get the most out of their learning experience. Our job from a filtering perspective is to really, prevent students from gaining access to inappropriate content, whilst at the same time making sure that we're really not over blocking their access to the internet. The last thing we want to do is prevent education from actually taking place. Going a step further than that would be the real-time monitoring element. And like I said earlier, our goal is to make sure that we're getting the right information in front of the right people as quickly as possible. I was having a conversation with a previous head teacher who's now retired, and he was explaining how he used to really prioritize the students so much that he ultimately, prevented and stopped himself from prioritizing himself to the point where eventually he just completely burnt out. And I think that's something that we're seeing more and more within education. He was able to identify that he was burnt out. He was able to go to his partner, go to his peers and make them aware of that. And they were able to put a plan in place to really make sure that he could get through that particular period of his life. And that took a lot of courage to kind of identify that and to make people aware of that. I don't think students necessarily sometimes will be as proactive in making people aware that they're maybe struggling mentally, or the pressures are becoming, too much to handle as such. And you look at some of the statistics that we see in education. In 2020, 67% of student suicides gave out clear warning signs, which kind of backs up that point around how students aren't necessarily going to be forthcoming with how they're feeling. So again, it's our job to really make sure that if there are any early warning signs of things along the lines of self-harm, suicidal searches, things along those lines, it's our job to make sure that we're getting the right information in front of the right people as quickly as possible.
How can we get that information straight away? What you mentioned, you mentioned filtering, which I'm taking to be you're stopping sites that they can't get onto. But what happens if they try to get onto a site when you've said about suicide? How do we get that early warning sign? What happens with that?
Yeah, so to your point, the filtering side of things will ultimately either block or allow certain access to the internet. But it's the monitoring piece. From a Lightspeed perspective, we have an agent that sits directly on the device. And that agent utilizes some extremely sophisticated AI technology that really looks at far more than just the word suicide in your example there. It will look at how is that word actually structured within that particular request. One of the biggest challenges right now in relation to getting those accurate alerts is that sometimes, DSLs are overwhelmed with the amount of notifications that they're receiving because certain methods out there are just looking at the keyword. And by that, I mean suicide, kill, gun, knife. And then it's generating an alert based on that one word and that one word alone. But what we're doing is we're looking at how is that word actually structured? What's the context around it? If it was Suicide Prevention Week and you had a student that was researching suicide rates, we don't want to notify the safeguarding lead of that because they're searching that for educational purposes. But what we do want to alert the safeguarding lead on is things along the lines of how do I commit suicide, or where do I go to kill myself, or how do I kill myself painlessly? Anything along those lines, that's what we need to get in front of the right people as quickly as possible.
And I think that's really important, isn't it, Antonia?
Yeah.
It's about getting that information to the right people at the right time to make that intervention. It's there.
And it really is. And I think the introduction of the AI technology sitting inside of that will move the conversation forward quite quickly, quite well, because we all know that schools and indeed parents at home, they struggle using monitoring and filtering systems because it picks up so many so much terminology that it can be problematic for them to use it. But the use of the AI and filtering down into exactly what a child is looking at, I think is absolutely crucial to validate it and to allow people to use it in the most free way that will keep kids safe.
And as we're talking about these, it's like false positives, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
it's coming up with something that isn't right, and it's a bit like that cry wolf sort of thing, isn't it? There's so many different things, but you can't miss that. We can't miss that one thing that is actually true, can we? Because no matter what it is, safeguarding is paramount, isn't it?
It has to trump everything. When you sort of think about sort of parents who are doctors, who are solicitors, and you're using the internet naturally, and keywords are flagging up and sort of stopping you doing your work, and it's the same in schools. It's why the filtering and monitoring has to be absolutely perfect and really, really fine-tuned to make sure that it's working properly. And I think that's what Lightspeed are doing in the use of the AI. It's really speeding that up and giving it a real amount of credibility and helping the DSLs and the mental health leads in schools to really support the students that need it at the moment they need it.
We've mentioned DSLs. What's a DSL?
A designated safeguarding lead is the one person in a school who's responsible for safeguarding in that school environment. Sometimes they have like a whole team of people sitting underneath them if they're in a bigger school. or sometimes in sort of special educational needs, smaller schools or primary schools, it can also be the head teacher as well. So when Shaun talks about pressure of work, that person in that head teacher in that one school can have all of those different roles as well, and it becomes, I think, overwhelming, doesn't it?
It certainly does, and fortunate to speak to many DSLs, and that kind of overwhelming word gets thrown up a lot. They have so many things to focus on, so many roles, so many responsibilities, that ultimately, if you're not doing things in the right way, it can become extremely overwhelming. And again, that's why it's important for us to do everything that we can to support not only DSLs, but also those head teachers that do have those multiple roles, or other people within the schools that are focusing on the student well-being. With Lightspeed, we have a human review element as well, which we haven't touched on yet. But in the first instance, our job is to email the DSL to make them aware that a particular incident has happened and provide them with the information to review that case. But in the second instance, when devices are being taken home and it's out of hours, it's still the responsibility of the schools to protect and safeguard those students. An email notification will be sent, but it might be 11 p.m. or it could be 1 a.m. in the morning. And unfortunately, that is the time of day where we do see a lot of those imminent threat incidences happen. So in that particular case, that notification will get sent to the safeguarding lead, but it would also get sent to our human review team, where in real time, our team of safety specialists who have extensive experience in emergency services, student wellbeing, counselling, things of that nature, they'll be able to review that case on the school's behalf and concur that it's a real legitimate incident where there is imminent threat to life, and then pick up the phone and call that DSL in real time to again make sure that they're fully aware of that incident. If the first contact wasn't to answer, we can set up a call tree. So we call through to contact number 2 and contact number 3. And if need be, call through to local emergency services as well, just to again make sure that we're making the relevant people aware of that particular situation, so we can then get the help that student so desperately needs.
I think a lot of people aren't aware. Obviously, we had the government scheme that provided children with laptops when they were through COVID, but those laptops are still out there, aren't they? And they still have all the filtering and monitoring systems on them. So at some point, the school remains responsible whilst they're using that laptop at home, and then Lightspeed come in. So I think there might be a conversation going forward about, is there a need for a DSL 24-hour service, an emergency DSL service that might be out there?
I was just thinking
because they can't hold that. I mean, I recently did a survey in my DSLs Together group, which is for safeguarding leads in schools. It's like a membership. And I was asking them about their well-being. Do you fear the phone ringing at 3 o'clock in the morning? Do you go home desperate for coffee and wine? Are you scared every time the phone rings? And the answer, resoundingly, from very senior people who've been teachers for many, many years, was yes, I'm frightened. I'm scared every time the phone rings. Do you need support and supervision? Yes, I do. And I think the government did a survey fairly recently with a piece of work with some head teachers. Would you like to do reflective supervisions? Would you like some support going in? And very few of them felt able to say yes, we would do it. But the ones who did, I think it was like something like 12 or 15% of them said yes, we would. And those who did got an enormous amount of benefit from it. But actually there's something in schools, isn't there, that says actually we're designated safeguarding leads, we're head teachers, we are the ones holding it. We have to hold it together. But they need some support in there. They need your kind of support, and they need that more sort of human support as well. Together, I think it's coming together, isn't it, that's going to make a difference.
Absolutely. It is really challenging.
It's huge.
And it is hard to ask a safeguarding lead to carry that responsibility out of hours, as well as out of term. And that's where, the human review team will step in, but we have to remind ourselves that this is for the real, high level incidences. To kind of throw some numbers out there, we protect over 25 million students globally through our filtering and our alert platform. This year alone, we've had over 800 cases that are seen to be imminent threat. So it kind of gives you an example of the problem we have, but also, not necessarily the overwhelming scale of it. So it's there as and when you need it, but these phone calls aren't going to be coming through every weekend. It's only for those real high-level incidences, and that's why it's so important for us to make sure that we are, making people aware of early warning signs. And by making people aware of early warning signs, we can hopefully put a plan in place to step in and prevent anything from escalating and getting to that imminent threat level.
I think my mind's just going, and we've talked about COVID and about these devices going home and the mental well-being of children and again the mental well-being of staff. It's getting so much. I mean, it used to be that you used to go to school, the devices would stay in school, we'd have a walled garden, we'd filter completely in school, so we'd be okay in school, but then it came out. But now the devices are going home and it's a 24/7 job. And as you mentioned, it's not just in term time.
No.
This is causing a lot more stress on the teachers, isn't it, Antonia?
It certainly is, and it's causing stress on the students and the parents as well. I think it's almost normal, isn't it, now for 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning for kids to either be on their phones or on their laptops checking whether somebody's responded to their emails or not, whether they've responded to their messages. And for people our generation, that's kind of a bit weird, isn't it? It doesn't feel normal. We were brought up without that pressure going on. So I think there needs to be both a proactive and a reactive stage. So the Lightspeed needs to be reactive and think of the lives that you've saved. I'm sitting here thinking, my goodness, how many lives around the world have you saved with your systems that are sitting in there with your people on the phones lines? But actually, if we can skill children up in the first instance, because we know the threats are coming in an instant, and they might be from bullying, they might be self-harm ideas, but they also equally might be people trying to groom them. Maybe kids who are quite vulnerable, who maybe don't have the friends. It all comes as a big melee together, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So it's all you end up in a bit of a mess. But at sort of 3 o'clock in that morning, if you're being asked for that and you're really stressed as a child, what do you do? And that's the moment when you absolutely start to panic. And my view is that's when the protective factors have to kick in at a very clear stage, because none of us will be thinking clearly at that point. You wouldn't be, I'm guessing. I wouldn't be. And we're kind of adults. But my view is I think potentially this is a one that might help, is if children had a really clear plan. What do I do at that moment when something's threatening me? Whether it's somebody asking for a nude picture of them, an inappropriate picture, whether it's somebody asking for money, whether it's somebody threatening them to do something in the morning to get videos or photographs of their friends. All of these things are very, very real, and they're all coming from sort of serious organised crime at the very top. So these are serious threats. What do they do to break that cycle? And they're not be thinking straight. So maybe it's as simple as having a plan, a really quick, simple plan. Who's the one person? Where's my panic button? What do I do? So it's not me thinking, it's somebody else thinking for me. I just put that out there as an idea.
No, I think it's a great point, and I think it's about how do we best educate children and students on how to navigate that particular scenario. We can't necessarily always rely on these early warning signs that I reference, and that's why we try to be as proactive as possible within our development, to bring in things in such as the tip line, so that students can anonymously make people aware that they're going through a particular situation or they're feeling a particular way. And then from there, anonymously, they can go and have a conversation with the safeguarding lead to, dive into that in a bit more detail and, again, put a plan in place to get through that particular period of their lives. And we're also trying to bridge the gap in between schools and the parents as well. These devices are being taken home, and although they are school-owned devices, they're now also being used within the parents' home environment. And we're trying to bridge that gap between the schools and the parents to make parents also aware of, well, what is my child actually doing on this device that the school have now given them? So we can provide them with visibility over the last 7 days worth of website history, what was allowed, what was blocked. If there is anything standing out as a concern there as a parent, like how do I address that? They now have the information to have that conversation with their child. And we can also give parents some control, not all control, but some control over, again, how is that device going to be used whilst it's at home? So do I want to pause the web browsing activity and prevent my child from gaining access to the internet past 8 p.m, not only to try to get them to come off their device, but also keep them safe as well? Or do I want to block access to YouTube or social media? So we're trying to do everything that we can to, like I say, bridge that gap, but also give parents the visibility as well, but also give students a voice in how they can make the relevant staff members aware that they might be going through a difficult period.
Yeah, and I think from what you're saying there, it's about education. It's about that proactive approach about what we can actually do. And my mind was going, yeah, but if we just block them at home with that device, if they've got a mobile phone, then they're going to go off and they're going to do something with that mobile phone. So as you said before, Antonia, how is it that we can actually get them to think about what they're doing? We know what we do with strangers, and I know when I was doing a little bit of a job as an ICT advisor, I talked about keeping it real. We know what we do with strangers. We don't talk to strangers. We don't take anything from strangers. Is there anything anywhere that schools can get more advice? I know that there's the KCSIE that the government came out with. Is there anything more that we can actually do?
Obviously, keeping children safe in education is the integral part of for any school to comply with, in terms of the filtering and monitoring systems, and also the exploitation. It will take schools all the way through all of that information. But there are interesting, I think, ideas sitting outside of that about sort of personal safety and teaching children. When we were little, we learned things by rote, right? Mm-hmm. So we learned. Well, I'm that sort of age when I was Grange Hill age, so
Yeah.
I'm reminded you're the Grange Hill age as well. So we all remember Zamo, don't we? Just say no, right? So I think it's about, to some extent, it's about teaching children those things that they will remember at the moment that they need them without having to think about them. So it's about getting them to understand what it is to interact in a digital age. And that, I think, starts at a very early age, and almost going back to the very basics that we learned, but modernising it. So using song, using those kind of interactions, I think, sort of around body safety particularly, and around stranger danger, and around keeping themselves safe. And I think there are innovative things out there which interact brilliantly with things that Lightspeed do, which can create almost like a shield around a child. It's like Captain Marvel's shield. You need all of these pieces in place, I think, to keep that child safe at the moment that they need it.
And it's sometimes hard for them to have the confidence to say no sometimes, isn't it?
And they won't. So if they know it instinctively, my guess is that it will just kick in in the way that we say, just say no.
Oh, absolutely. And like I said, it's that confidence bit, because we've talked about a lot of this grooming and everything else, but there's so much with social media now that we see all these lovely pictures of models and actors and everything online, which then portrays an image that a person should be. And again, even that can start getting questions, what they're looking on websites and so on. Couldn't it, Shaun?
I think I totally agree. And I think, when we actually take a step back and look at what world students are growing up within right now, it's extremely challenging for them. Not only do they have the pressures of school and exams. I was speaking to a friend of mine whose son's revising for his GCSEs right now, and he's taking 24 exams, and he's struggling with the pressures around that, struggling with not necessarily knowing what direction he's going to go within his life after school. Then you put social media into that cocktail as well, and the pressures around that. It is extremely challenging. Again, from a Lightspeed perspective, it's a tough one to manage, because yes, we want to block social media and prevent students from gaining access to social media, because it can be a distraction, but at the same time, there can be educational benefits to social media, as there can be for tools such as YouTube, things of that nature. So that's why we've given our users the ability to really customize the rules around social media. So do we want to allow it, or do we want to block it, or do we want to go a step further and to put it into read-only mode? So maybe during school, our students have access to Facebook and X and other social media platforms, but they can't post, they can't comment, they can't chat with friends, but they can still gain access to certain information within those platforms.
So what can we do with parents? There seem to be a big thing in this as well. I mean, I know that a lot of the times that when I was doing the ear safety talks, it's really difficult to get somebody in to talk about ear safety and safeguarding, and you wouldn't say, let's open the back door and let anyone in. would you, in a house? So what are the sort of things that parents could do with regards to the children?
I think it's about understanding what's really there for the kids and how they're interacting with it. So, kids playing on games, interactive games, do parents really know what's happening? Kids playing in VR, do they know what's really happening inside of there? I kind of play in VR. I kind of like that stuff. I don't play Xbox or anything like that, but I do have headsets. And actually getting inside of there and seeing what the dangers are, because it's in that kind of world that the parents can't get inside. They cannot be inside that VR world, but they can, again, skill their children to know what's there, because the threats are incredibly real inside of there, whilst VR is incredibly liberating for particularly kids with disabilities, or who maybe don't feel that they look thin, or they don't feel that they look right. In VR, you're just an avatar, but then so is everybody else. And it can be absolutely terrifying. I've been into a few, and you're suddenly talking to somebody, and who are they? And you don't know, but as an adult, you just jump out, you go, oh, this is really too scary for me. But would a kid do that? Would they be drawn into that conversation? And we know that there are notifications coming out, certainly those of you inside of the VR a little bit, there are notifications coming out, do you want to be friends with X because X was in the same environment as you, and you don't know them. As a 52-year-old grown-up person, you go, no, but you don't want to be friends with them. But as a child, if you're feeling vulnerable, or maybe you want to make friends, or you want to be more cool, maybe you would be friends with them. And then that's, again, where the conversations kicks in that we had a few minutes ago, about people befriending you and finding out information about you. And then that's your friend. And they could be literally anybody. And I put a lot of social media out around VR and that kind of thing. Getting people to actually interact with it and understand it it's really tough, because it's something that none of us particularly grew up with. So it's almost that it's on that too hard pile. So it's incumbent upon us, I think, isn't it, to find ways to get parents to engage with it. And hopefully, I mean, a part of the DSL thing that I do is about providing newsletter and information for parents, so that DSL is another job they don't have to do, as they can just grab the information and go. But they say to me, well, nobody's reading it. Nobody's got time to read this stuff. So, well, we create videos for you. So we've got video that you can just send to parents. They can download it and go 30-second Instagram reel type videos. And I think it's that way. It's about thinking about innovative ways of engaging people with the information that they really need, rather than just being safeguarding, which everybody runs away from, goes, I'm really, really scared. It's all too much for me. But if you ask them the simple question, do you want to help stop abuse and exploitation? Every parent I know says, yes, I'll do that. But it's about changing the narrative. I think we've got to start changing the narrative and thinking, what do the parents need? And that's kind of where you're helping as well, thinking, what is it that child needs in that moment, not what does a generic child need.
So we talked a little bit around all the things that can happen and what, like, maybe the pitfalls can be and so onwards. But I'm just now thinking, with a lot of schools changing over their methodology, and with COVID, where there was a lot more one-to-one iPad deployments being put out there, and a lot more technology in the classroom, and it being more 24/7 in different ways. What is it we can now do with schools to actually change maybe safeguarding to be a little bit more cool? Let's put it that way. How can we change it to be a little bit more cool? Because we know it needs to be there.
Well, I think for me, it's knowing that the safety nets are in place, right? So that we know that the Lightspeeds and the Team SOSs and the CPOMs have got that all covered off. And then it's about, I think, being really proactive with it and not being scared of it. So it's a really serious subject, safeguarding. But I think there's all sorts of things out there which can support schools and support parents and support kids. And it's kind of a change of narrative, isn't it, from it being really depressing and really sad and really difficult, because it is a difficult subject, but actually using engaging businesses, charities that are out there that are teaching kids and teaching parents how to keep their kids safe.
And I think that, like you said, these tools there are a little bit of that safety net that we can use when we're thinking about the technology and being proactive about how we educate these. How can we use this technology that you've got, Shaun, to think about Well, what insights does that give me apart from just the safeguarding? What can it do for us for that?
I think we've spent a long time now within education trying to make sure that students have access to iPads and devices, and with that, their exposure to online resources have increased, which is great because it's contributing to a positive learning experience for the students. But we've not necessarily taken a step back and looked at, how are students actually engaging with not just the devices, but with all of the applications and the online learning tools that we're putting onto these applications. So what we're able to do at Lightspeed is we're able to provide feedback and data to the relevant staff members within schools on, again, like which applications have a high adoption rate, which applications have a low adoption rate, which applications are our students engaging with versus not engaging with. And then from there, it opens up the conversation to maybe do we need to reinvest professional development into certain applications that we thought were, again, contributing to a positive learning experience, but actually they're not. And then from there, they're able to put a plan in place to, get that application back in front of students and reinvest professional development to teachers to utilize that application moving forward.
The message sometimes is better coming from students to some of these things, that this is a reality. Would you agree with that, Antonia?
I think it is, and schools do struggle, I think, capturing a child's voice. We know that they do, but they also use sort of the older students to create assemblies, to create days, safeguarding days. Safeguarding is a tricky word, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
But child protection days, and hearing their voice is incredibly powerful, because coming from your peers, you're always going to listen more, aren't you? So I think there's another step inside of that, which is actually, how do we, as grown-ups who are responsible for this stuff, how do the DSLs listen to what those kids are doing, and how do they replicate it? How do they take the things that actually engage the students? So it's all about almost a whole school community learning together, isn't it, and coming together to create that safer environment.
And when would you say that's the right age to start doing things like this? When is the right age to start talking about being safe and the right things to do with children in?
I think it's as soon as you possibly can. We all know the sort of digital citizenship, there's digital births now, aren't there, as well? So kids are online from a very, very early age. I think almost preschool and when you start school is the time where you need to start thinking about creative ways of doing that. And there are some incredible businesses out there, incredible people doing really interesting work. I know a particular one called the Stay Safe Initiative. Guy down in Swindon goes into schools right across the southwest and teaches boys to be men. He teaches how to actually interact on the internet, but he does it in a real life, really engaging way, in their way, listening to what they need, what's their language. Not talking from my perspective or his perspective, but what is it that the kids want to hear? And I think it's really about thinking about the receiver of that information. What can we do to engage people? Because it is important. When you ask people, everybody wants to help. Everybody wants to stop this stuff from happening. Everybody wants kids to have the most incredible time that they can online. But we need to equip them with those tools to do it. And doing it only, I think my genuine belief is you will only do that if you listen to how they want to receive that information. So I learned really early on, I'm a barrister, led off with that. And I know if you don't engage a judge differently to engage a jury, you're not going to get out of there very happy, and your client's not going to be very happy. You have to learn to talk to the person, not talk to yourself.
Yeah, and
Useless.
I think you are completely right there. Is the only way to get this message across is to talk in the language that the child is learning. And for me, it's making sure we've educated them so that, and if I can put this in a nice way, it's a bit like having a trapeze that they're playing around on the passion of a trapeze, but yet we've got that safety net underneath that your software can help. Isn't that all right, Pat?
Yeah, absolutely. For us, I see Lightspeed Alert as a seatbelt, that it's there if you need it and you can still have a crash, but it's far better to have that seatbelt on than not have it on. And we speak around, how do we make it cool in relation to how do we, really have safeguarding leads embrace this role. I think we just have to make it as easy as possible to digest and not too overwhelming.
I loved the seatbelt analogy. I think it was fantastic.
I think it's a good
because you can build out from there to wherever you want to go. You could be on a rocket, couldn't you? be on a spaceship. You could be,
However, the technology is going to
however
change.
the technology is going to change.
And I think what we've talked about there is the purpose of what we've been talking about in the whole podcast is let's ensure that we can guide our students through and adults through the metaverse or whatever verse we're going to go into, and we can do that all safely with a full awareness of what can happen, what can't happen, but allowing them to make the right educated choice when things come up.
Absolutely.
It really is, and it's about, because we talked to the meeting, didn't we, about overwhelm as well, and it's about making sure that everybody has the information that they need, because the massive world of safeguarding it's huge. There is so much information, really good information, but actually for me it's about making sure that everybody's got the right information, which is why I created my DSLs together, which is all about just making sure that safeguarding leads in schools have just what they want to give them, the information they want, and sort of the support that they need to get to do that role in a much more simple way, rather than being overwhelmed. And it's the same as using the tech. It all comes together for me. We all have to work together to make it make sense.
We do need to work together, and I think we've got quite a broad viewpoint on this in this podcast as it is. But I'm going to ask you a bit more of a personal sort of question now, and that's about within your career and what you've been doing within safeguarding. Have you got a success and a challenge that you could tell us about that's really guided what you've been doing in the future? So I'll ask you first, Antonia.
I think the success is bringing together groups of people who can actually support schools, parents and everybody with safeguarding. So creating that cohesion. I think to that I have a thing called the Balloon Crew. Nobody knows about it, but we work in the background. It's all operated by kindness. I think the challenge is, for me, is to make sure that I'm engaging properly with the people who need to hear the messages. And in a digital age, when I'm 52 years old, I'll happily say it, that can be quite difficult. So it's about hearing what other people need. So it's an ongoing challenge for me. How do I make myself TikTok friendly?
How do you make yourself TikTok?
Oh, I don't know. any
I'm looking forward to them TikToks coming out, Antonia, absolutely. And the same question to you, Shaun.
For me personally, I think it's being part of something that's positively touched the lives of over 25 million students now. I don't think there's many roles and even sectors that you get to kind of look back on a monthly and annually basis and really look at the impact that you've made. So for me, that's a massive personal success to be a part of something so positive. In relation to the challenge, I think historically it's been, bringing DSLs and the IT team together in the same room, sitting around the same table to talk about how do they overcome challenges, but how do they overcome those challenges together. Thankfully for us in 2023, the KCSIE amendments and the guidance was updated, and that did bring those two departments together, and now they do sit around the table far more, and DSLs are taking a lot more of a lead in relation to that monitoring conversation. But historically, bringing everyone around the table to have that conversation has been a challenge, but hopefully that's now going to be a success.
Absolutely, and I think you're right to bring out the KCSIE again about the policies and everything else that people need to do, and pulling out the fact that this is everyone working together. It's not the job of one person. It's not the job of another person. We can't pass over, right, that's your role or this is your role. It's everyone's job to ensure that every child in schools is safe, isn't it? And I've got one more question for you guys. So, but I'm going to start that off about, it's that top tip. What top tip have you got? And I'm going to actually start off. I don't normally do that, but I think my top tip is read the KCSIE again and look back at it, and it does clarify some more points that's there. But what would you say? What is your top tip for protecting students in the digital age? If some school was going down this route, what would be your top tip to actually tell them? Again, I'll go to you first, Antonia.
Can I have two?
Oh, go on then.
Reach out and see what's out there. See what interesting stuff is out there, because it doesn't have to be boring. It doesn't have to be hard work. There are all sorts of people out there who want to do really good stuff to support you in the job that you're doing. And get your students to create a safety plan. Let them know where that emergency button is for when things go wrong. Have it in your favourites list. but make sure it's done in advance. I think it could be the real difference between a kid being groomed and not.
Brilliant, I like that. And same to you, Shaun.
Mine's very quick because it's very similar to yours, and it's just working together.
Yeah,
It's learning
really
from
is.
each other, and to your point, there's so many resources out there for everyone to be able to utilize. So being able to take experience from other people, that would certainly be my top tip.
Totally.
And I think if I can just pull those together, working together, this is can be a very challenging subject. It can be very difficult, but if we work together, we can actually find a way through all of this, can't we? And talking to the people that are affected, as well as the people that are actually making the solutions. I think that's the big point I'm taking from this. And there's help out there.
Yeah,
There's
there
help
really
out there
is.
to create that safety net, to create a proactive approach to educating people about what is the rights and wrongs of so things. But we can do this together. Can I just say thank you very much, Antonia? Thank you very much, Shaun, for such a really engaging conversation. And can I say thank you very much to you for joining us for this episode of Empowered.